Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you joining us. Today, I've got Alisa Bonsignore and Jenny Morgan with me, and we're going to talk about climate communications. So to kick us off, Jenny, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the book you wrote.
Sure. My name is Jenny Morgan. During the day, I work for a project developer that is focused on super pollutant mitigation. And then at night, I'm writing all about ways that we can come together as a community to stop this crisis that we're all experiencing. And the book that I wrote, Cancel Culture and Climate, is basically identifying one of our main problems, which is our inability to communicate with one another effectively, which is then promoting this infighting within the climate community as well as ineffective use of our time. And so I wrote a book to not only comment on that problem, but then also put together some frameworks on ways that we can navigate our way out of it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Alisa, why don't you do the same if you don't mind?
Sure. So Alisa Bonsignore and I run Clarifying Complex Ideas, which is a strategic communications consultancy, a lot of content strategy in my background, going way, way back. We're talking journalism and stuff like that before all of, the content strategy was, a thing with the name. I'm now better known for my sustainable content work. There's a book. Where I talk about, the environmental impact of actually the stuff that we create and consume in our digital content. So, how we can measure and how we can mitigate the impacts of our digital lives, basically.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I love the idea of this conversation. I love the idea of these two books being bookends to the conversation, because I really feel like there's such nice compliments to one another. Jenny, your book feels like, how do we get out of our own way? And Alisa, yours is very much like, how do we practice what we preach? And so it's really, yeah, it's been really these two great angles on climate communications and such. And so, Jenny, if you don't mind, talk to me about like what the biggest challenge in climate communications. You talk a lot about cancel culture. You talk a lot about the psychological implications of how we again get out of our own way, and how we can stop othering folks and stuff, especially within the movement. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the biggest hurdles and challenges from within the climate communications movement?
Yeah, well, I think where I place the most amount of like the source of the problem, I talk a lot about fear and how fear is an ineffective tool to making good quality decisions. But I think that the main issue is that humans are very much so binary thinkers unless we challenge that, unless we're intentional on going beyond that. And so I talk a lot about dichotomous thinking, which is this either or, this or that type of thinking. And from an example, you could think, I am either all nature-based solution or I'm all avoidance and decarbonization. And so we tend to put ourselves in a bucket, and then that then not only puts us in one place, but then it also others everyone else. And so rather than saying that it's natural to be holistic in our sustainability pursuit and it makes sense for everyone to be doing everything all at once with the largest amount of effort we can, instead we kind of end up shaming and pointing fingers. And so I really talk about that. And then I think a big distinction is talking about how cancel culture is very negative and has a connotation to it that isn't promoting progress. It's very shame-based. It concludes the conversation, whereas accountability brings forth an issue that we need to address, but its goal is to navigate its way out and then bring forth a positive conclusion. And so trying to kind of figure out, am I participating in a cancel culture-esque type of environment, or am I identifying a problem and taking accountability and then finding solutions forward? And so that distinction is really important.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's really important component because it probably gets in the way of what Alisa is recommending in her book. You admitted earlier when we were prepping for this that you're a kind of a bit of a troll magnet, and so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how cancel culture and stuff like that could potentially undermine the idea of ideas in your book, and like what's some of the kind of pushback that you've come across.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, like what's interesting is that, I did a lot of research into the same type of stuff that Jenny does, like in the process of all of this, because my book, I mean, it's been out for almost a year now, but like this was like 10 years of research that,
Right,
that
right,
goes into the book, right? And you get you start with all of this, huge information about why people are doing what they're doing and how they're saying what they're saying, and the roots of that before I even got down into the, the nitty gritty of, like measuring your actual carbon footprint of your content, right? But, back to what Jenny was saying before we can move on to my stuff. One of the things that I think is such a powerful thing with the whole cancel culture and the fear-based stuff is that, so much of the way we communicate or has been framed as effective communication over the years, and going back to my journalism days, going back to my marketing days, is like marketing is fear-based, right? Like, what are you missing?
right.
What makes you the in crowd? What makes you excluded, right? So all of our communications have really, funneled down into this terrible, like,
FOMO.
narrow band
Right.
of relying on fear and othering, and why how you can be in within your group, right? And that's a huge part of it. And so then when we're talking about moving on to my stuff, when you're talking about like, okay, how are we going to, measure the footprint of, our website or our app, or, all of the stuff that we're creating under our broader content strategy, there's this fear about all of the things that we're going to miss out on, right? Because, well, if we don't auto load this video at the second you get to our university website, that's running like 23 megabytes of, video, automatically when you get there. What if they don't know what the campus looks like? Or, there's all of this fear that somebody else is going to be doing something that you're not. And that if you're speaking directly, clearly, concisely, it's not enough somehow, because we've always been taught that, there should be more, right? We have to create more. And especially when you get into people who are content professionals, all of our metrics are based on creation,
Right.
right? We're not based on, creating leaner things. We're not based on removing things that are outdated. We're based on what more we can create this quarter and how we can demonstrate that connection to the organization. So, you start to end up with this snowball effect of, more and more and more stuff
Right.
and more misleading stuff, in the sense of, we haven't removed the old product information, but we've got new product information, and, Google's searching both of those and which is correct, right? Or,
Right. Right.
and you've got all of these problems coming from that, and it's really working counter to the notion of keeping things simple, lean, straightforward, and more sustainable.
Yeah, yeah, that is a challenge, and I hesitate to throw the wet blanket of AI into the
Oh
conversation,
yeah, well,
but
there's
I,
that
I think that it
too.
it feels very much like, that has ramped up, especially over the last couple of years, where like
Yeah,
we were marketers and communicators were already feeling that pressure to publish for years and years and years, and now we're at a place where AI has just turned that fire hose on and covered us all in slop and stuff, and so. Um, I think that idea affects both of the work the work that both of you are doing. And, it very much undermines our ability to get a handle on what is the actual environmental impact of the content that we're creating and putting out there in the world and stuff like that. But then also, algorithmic priorities feed on fear and anger and othering and all of this kind of stuff. And so I just wondering if each of you would just share a little thoughts about, I know as you were writing it, I'm sure the wet blanket came up in your research. And so I'm just wondering if could talk a little bit about it and kind of your take on it. Go ahead, start. Maybe Lisa, go ahead. You start first this
yeah.
time.
So from my perspective, especially with the way AI is, pulling information, right? Especially if you're not dealing with content governance and you're not removing all the old nonsense that's still been sitting
Right.
there like an archaeological dig on your website, like it's more likely to pull incorrect information to begin with, right? And that sort of feeds that cycle of, your incorrectness builds on your incorrectness, and now you've got something completely different coming out in the outputs. And if all of your customers, your audience, whatever your scenario might be, is you relying on these AI tools, to get their information, then the chances are, if you're not, doing it more correct, you're going further down the wrong path. And now you've got, Reddit picks up that, this is incorrect, and you're not giving the right information, and now suddenly that adds more credence to your incorrectness, and that validates the GPT position of, that must be the one true content, right? So like everything snowballs from there. And so I think, especially from my perspective, content governance becomes even more critical, and like, looking at what you already have and making sure that what you have is the correct what you have.
For sure. Yeah.
Really is extremely important in this era of like that magnification.
Yeah, we see a lot of our clients struggle not only with content governance, but both data governance and just general digital
Yeah,
governance. Like, what are the tools that I'm using? Are they talking to each other?
right.
Are they actually communicating in a way that is meaningful to my organization?
But then, I mean, that comes back to the metrics, right? Like if management is not prioritizing you to go through and fix the stuff that was there before,
Right.
then the time that you spend on that is time you're not spending on the things that get you your bonus or get the department its rewards, right? And so you're even more focused on forward and creation and more rather than, fixing what's already there.
Right, right. Jenny, what's your take on algorithmic priorities and in combating cancel culture?
I mean, as someone that's taking a news detox, I have a lot of feelings around
Good for
this right
you.
now. Um, and I'm like a lot of things that are bubbling to the surface to me right now is just kind of coming back to how we talk to our friends or our
Mm.
children about, things that we're advising them to focus on, but then we don't apply those same standards to ourselves. Like that simplicity and curiosity and comfort with change and adaptation, I think is something that we can lose sight of when we've got this like machine telling us otherwise, even though we can't really pinpoint where we're getting that guidance. But I mean, I'm thinking a lot about just some of the reporting stress and fear that companies are afraid to acknowledge the level of reliance that they've placed on artificial intelligence and the amount of energy that's being utilized to support it. A lot of companies are really shying away from talking about that out loud. While they've met these really great net zero targets and they've, achieved such amazing sustainability goals, there's this like undisclosed second bedroom of the house that no one's really willing to talk about. And
We don't
that's
go in there.
all, yeah, that's all fear, right? Like it's fear of being called out, it's fear with accepting reality and really understanding how to deal with that. And so, I mean, I think it really comes down to is understanding what are your goals and objectives as a team and what does progress look like to you? And if you can truly define that as being growth and as more, you need to build out the why, the metrics
Right.
that's supporting that. Like, what is that? Or is that just because you think the latest and greatest doc that you just wrote is driving that forward? It's I think it's really coming back to the basics of really understanding what's driving you. How can you make sure that what you are pointing to as your KPIs for this year or for the next 5 years, are they accurate? Are they transparent? Are they actually driving the next innovation in the next phase of your business or of you as a professional? Is it really supporting that or not? And so I think it's just like constantly asking yourself, is this nourishing my brand and myself, or is this just kind of a false perception I've created?
Sure. And I guess that's a great segue into my next question, which is really just about, doing exactly what you're talking and also, being cognizant of greenwashing and even, green hushing and a couple of the other green words that have been out there lately. You want to talk a little bit about that? I think, in terms of strategy, communication strategy, but then again, the thing that comes up that I think about Elisa's book on is, the COP website a couple of years ago, like two conferences ago, made a big splash about the fact that they created a low carbon mode, but that didn't load by default, and they got a lot of guff around it, and then basically just shrunk back and said nothing and did nothing and everything. And so that's one example, but I'm sure both of you have many, many, many more examples of that, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share one or two.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about the difference between greenwashing, green hushing, and then I call it green recanting, but green freeze has been out there. There's a lot of whatever the next phase is, but it's basically greenwashing. You are either falsifying information or you're just not articulating your impact in a way that's understood by your stakeholders. That's actually the biggest problem. It's the communication failure where there's
Right,
positive intention and then there's some backlash because of a flaw that's been identified or confusion that's been identified. And rather than being like, oh, wow, we didn't think about it like that, or, ah, yeah, I know, we only had 2 inches of space to talk about an entire 3 year sustainability strategy, and that was tough. Rather than kind of admitting that, we then say, like, oh, people are talking and it's bad, so I'm just gonna pull back. And then that's causing the green hushing aspect where you are
right,
still doing really good things, but you're doing it silently, which is creating a perception that no one's actually doing anything. And
right.
then green recanting is even worse, where you're just saying, like, you know what? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. I'm just gonna
Just gonna
back out
shut up.
here and yeah, and
Yeah.
just keep, selling watches. And so I think it's really important to talk about our comfort level of feedback and admitting that this is a journey, this is progress, not perfection, and being
Right.
really honest about that from the forefront. And that's going to actually set everyone up for success of saying, like, oh, this is part of their 5 year plan. I'm looking into year one. And then if you can create that back and forth dialogue with your stakeholders that's continuous, now you've got something that's really building. You're seeing this
Right.
with some
Right.
of the interactive sustainability reports that are updated in real time rather than like
That's
the
right.
end of year, pretty graphics. It's actually something that's like saying what's actually working and what's happening, what's not working, all in real time.
And yeah, I love that. I think that's great. Same question to you, Elise, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
And I've been joking that at some of my client companies, there's like green whispering, which is like, if you know the secret handshake, we'll kind of tell you about what we're doing, like but we're not really, it's not necessarily that they're hushing it exactly, but, they're also, like it's sort of like an in-between zone, right? It's not, it's not the full on, shutdown of communications, but, if you know the right person and you know
Yeah.
the secret code,
Right. Right.
we'll let you in on this. And so like that's been a real interesting thing, especially domestically, this last year.
Yeah.
And seeing how things are going. I mean, a lot of my clients are European based, so it's a little bit different over there. But just what seeing domestically how that's being handled, and well, what do we do? Because this thing, I mean, it would be like a really excellent green initiative that we've got going on, but we don't really want to talk about that. But it's a good financial story, actually. So we're just going to focus on the money. But if you know the secret handshake, we'll tell you
Yeah.
the rest of it, right? We'll tell you the rest of the story because this was actually something in the works for some time on our green platform, right? Like we had a plan for this, but now it's just a money story. So it's been interesting to watch kind of how that shifts, and when you can point out to them like, but wait, doesn't that have an actual like environmental benefit? They go, oh yeah, yeah, okay, let's talk about that more, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been an interesting thing to watch how this all goes. Terrible, but interesting, if you can distance yourself a little bit from it. Trying to see how that plays out, and what that means for different companies.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think, I mean, we're all on a journey, right? Like we all explore and learn about sustainability and environmental impact and all of that kind of stuff. And there's a kind of continuum of things of light bulbs that go off over your head. And that could be personal, that could be your department or team. It also could be organizational. What we often advise people to just kind of start where they are and find the like-minded people that are around them and start to build community around that kind of stuff. What advice would you have for people who are admittedly shy and whispering and recanting and doing all of these things, or not doing them, I should say, just in moving forward, like understanding that it is a journey and we are in a place where I'm going to be at a different place than you are. What advice would you have? Jenny, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big problem is that we are forgetting that we are a collection of humans that are making up all of these things. Like often we point to brands that are issuing some sort of statement or making some sort of decision that is then, dictating the next step. But those are humans that are making those
Right,
decisions.
right.
And there's something about even saying that, everyone's now kind of put me into like this person, like just saying I'm a human and I'm trying to recognize the humanity in every single thing that we do, that then makes me like a bit woo-woo, which I find fascinating because I mean, those are your buyers, those are your employees, those are the people funding your product or your service, those are the people that are, determining what's good and what's bad. And when we forget that, I think we lose sight of risk mitigation, business risk and climate risk mitigation, what growth looks like, what effectiveness and efficiency looks like, what is innovation, all of the things that drive industry are lost if we forget that it comes down to humanity. And so I would really come back with your internal team and reset on what are the priorities, how should they be communicated, and then what's the plan to start talking about that, to start getting some insights and feedback so that it can be something that you're iterating on and it's a constant flywheel of information that you're reviewing, putting out, hearing, listening, responding, and and really just making it a process versus like these it's like a bad way of driving a manual car or something. I feel like we can make it a much more smooth process that isn't scary. It's actually quite effective.
Right, right. Yeah, my father taught me how to drive a manual car by putting me on a hill like this on a gravel road and putting the
And good luck to
emergency brake. Yeah, and it was like, all right, go. Yeah, and it's not the best position situation to be in. Lisa, same question to you.
Well, so yes, all of what you said. But also, one of the things that I like to point out to people, and I presumably everyone who's here is somewhat climate interested, or else you wouldn't be on this webinar in the first place, right?
Right,
But we've internalized so much of the individual responsibility, right? I mean, we go back to, the whole idea of carbon footprint was a BP marketing campaign to shift the
right,
priority
right,
to an individual responsibility and not the fact that BP is one of like the 10 largest polluters in the history of the planet, right? So, so you start getting into this infighting of like, well, do you drive an EV or do you drive a conventional car? Well, you should be riding, taking public transit or riding your bike or like this is not the stuff that's really, I mean, yes, it matters, but like your individual choices are not what's going to tip the scales here, right?
right,
And
right,
fighting with other people about their individual choices is going to tip the scales. But, for example, if you work in content and you can reduce the carbon emissions of your website or your podcast or your whatever it may be, like you have leverage at work that you don't have in your
right,
individual life, right? You can make like exponentially more impact there than you can, debating whether or not, like, well, I can't make my son's favorite lasagna for his birthday because it uses beef, like it's a once a year thing. You can have the beef, right? Like this is not, this is
right,
not the
right.
thing that's going to make the difference. This is not the tipping point, right? But if you can reduce, tons of carbon emissions by, by updating the website and, making it leaner, like there's where your difference is going to be.
Right.
And so, trying to focus on like the bigger picture of, yes, it's individual decisions, but like figure out where you have the biggest influence in your touch points, right?
Which levers
And
can
it's
you
not going to
push?
be about whether or not you use that plastic straw that they already stuck into your drink. So it's already committed, right?
Right, right.
It's whether or not, you can make a bigger difference on a larger scale.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess to that end, what do you say to people who push back on that? Because we get a lot of pushback from folks who are like, oh, well, it's only a little bit of electricity on my homepage or whatever. And so I'm just curious to say, like, when people kind of push back as like, oh, well, the website isn't really a company priority for sustainability or anything like that. I'm curious to hear what you say and how you approach that.
So that's, I mean, the issue is not, I use the boxes in your attic analogy, right? Like you could have your boxes sitting in analogy in the attic, like you do with your web pages, right? They're sitting there, they're not using a lot of energy while they're sitting there, but when you have to move them, that's where the energy comes in.
Right.
So if I have to use, 4 MB, average 4 MB per page on a website, just using this ubiquitous example, if you download it and I download it and Jenny downloads it, now that's 12 megabytes
Right.
of
Right.
of copy. Now that's, 3 times the energy, 3 times the emissions, right? So obviously you don't want your company website to only be hit 3 times. You want it 3,000, 3 million, right?
Right.
So
Right.
now so it's not about the size of your web page as your web page sits there. It's about the size of your web page as your web page is used, right?
Right.
The energy comes to, it's the downstream and the use and the downloading and the transfer and the, that aspect of it, not the, sitting in the attic, just in the data center not being
Right.
touched, which, because you get into things where it's, like, oh, we've been storing the, 2008 sales meeting PowerPoint up there for, okay, yeah, but nobody's also hitting that, right? That's not something that,
Right.
that's negligible, but, your website, your podcast, your app, those are things that you want to be actively used on a daily basis. You want people downloading that. You want people using it. You want that, and that's where the energy is coming in. It's not the storage.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Jenny, you have question about kind of how you approach or how you recommend to people the idea of moving beyond othering and more towards like bridging and stuff, especially when there is such a heavy clash on things. Within the climate movement, we're all supposedly on the same side, but even on the outside and inside, how do you generally approach that? I know you have some great suggestions in your book around that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, I think it's really hard because this is a big deal. I think a lot of
It is
people
the big deal.
yeah, I think a lot of people are very stressed out and overwhelmed. There's a sense of helplessness. And you're talking about this with the straws and everything. I mean, I reference a lot of examples of cancel culture inside and outside of the climate space, proving that it is an ineffective tool to move the needle forward. But then if no one is can relate to any of those examples, the please recycle,
Right.
the like they're just begging you to recycle and you're just opting not to. Like, how can you
Yeah.
walk out of your door today? And so that is like the perfect example of how every single one of us has experienced cancel culture. We're being shamed by our behavior with no path forward. And so we're just stuck in this box. And then we all contribute to some form of, you know, recycle or what is it, wish cycling or hushing or however we're interacting
Right.
with that shame campaign. So it's really important to understand and recognize that all of us are experiencing this in some way and we're all contributing to it in some way. So if you are in a conversation where you're finding yourself at odds or there's confusion, coming to it with curiosity is definitely just the first
Yeah.
main thing where rather than responding with a statement, respond with a question. So if someone has said, "Oh, we can't use climate in our campaign anymore because climate's out," rather than becoming argumentative about that, ask a question like, "What's the data? Where's the data coming from that's showing that that's true? What's the purpose of removing it? Is it supporting our goals? Is it going to achieve what we're hoping in this campaign?" Um, just really coming to it with that type of air so that you're actually coming to an end result that matters versus one that's, kind of confusing and based on fear or just headlines, or maybe following the leader. There's somebody that's doing that, but
Sure.
ensuring that you're meeting values, asking yourself, am I attacking a person or an idea? That's really important too. Let's not attack each other. Let's attack what's actually the problem. And then just really keeping yourself in check of, how am I participating in this conversation? Is it going to support my ultimate goal? And in the book, I have a framework of exact questions you can ask yourself in a conversation that I've used in many, and it's been very helpful. It's actually led to a lot of climate progress by me just being an active, curious listener rather than, an otherer.
Yes, I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
And I
Go ahead,
also
Alisa.
think too that it helps to sort of bring things back to a higher level, right? Like when you can tie things into like the sustainable development goals, right? No one looks at the sustainable development goals and thinks, yeah, I don't want to deal with this eradicating poverty is just a bullshit goal, right? Or, like educating women or there are things that in there that like by and large, everyone looks at and goes, oh yeah, that'd be nice. Like those are
Right,
nice
right.
things to have. Okay, well, if you want to get to that point where we're talking about, health is related to climate, whether you like it or not, right? And there's intersections there, and trying to show people sort of the broader interconnectedness of everything.
Yes.
It helps to contextualize things, that it's not just like, I'm a crunchy granola do-gooder crusader on, like some hippie
Right.
quest, right? Like this is like, like this is working towards like a bigger picture with interrelated stuff that can make the world a better place. And do you want the world to be a better place? And even if you're, not in support of environmental causes, right? But you hunt. Okay, well, if you're a hunter, what happens to the ecosystem? If you don't have, if your ecosystem is out of
Right.
balance,
Right.
what happens to your annual hunting trip that you value so much? Or I think, and trying to explain, your cabin at the lake. Well, what if that burns down in the wildfire, right? Like, how do you, trying to contextualize it into things that actually come back to what matters without,
Right.
putting it into some sort of polarized, like, well, you're either all in on this
Right. Right.
terminology or you're not.
Yeah, it's about finding the shared experience, like
Yeah,
figuring out where that is. And I love your hunting example because I think that's probably in one area that people don't necessarily think that, like, oh, hunters, well, turns out they need nature to hunt, and so
yeah.
um just a reminder to everybody to drop your questions in the Q&A, and we will answer them. We've got a couple in here. Leslie wants to know if Jenny, if you have any examples of the companies with interactive sustainability reports. Off the top of your head, do you happen to know?
Oh no.
Not
There's
to put
many,
you on the
but now
spot
I'm
or
like,
anything.
Yeah,
Um,
blank.
yes, there are many that are doing it, and there are some. Now I'm just gonna like say vague. I'm gonna say green hushing response to this question. Um, there are a lot of the consulting companies and those that you can hire to do your emissions reporting and then contextualize it that offer that as a software service so that it is integrated into your website. And I know many are doing it. Anyone want to throw me a phone a friend? I could find some after.
Yeah, I was just going to say we can certainly always follow up on with everybody with some resources and stuff.
Yeah, I
Um,
really like them because you can click into it and
Yeah,
it's basically showing what the sustainability leaders that are looking at reporting is such a massive piece of what a corporate sustainability leader is doing. I also talk about cancel culture within an organization too, because a lot of times it's like the sustainability leader is crunching the numbers and trying to just like show the progress, and then they kick it over to marketing, and marketing wants it to be something that people feel excited about and it leads to sales or adoption or whatever they're measuring and
right,
hoping for. And so there can be a lot of cancel culture even within the organization because they themselves haven't talked to each other and both
right,
are blaming one another for whatever failure or backlash has come up. Marketing didn't do it right, or well, sustainability doesn't get it, and they're measuring or going towards the wrong thing. And so these interactive ones can be really cool because not only is it showing real-time data, and you've got to love data if you really want to see this crisis become, solved with solutions. And, marketing can then leverage like new things and keep it fresh content. So everyone wins if we work together like that.
Yeah, yeah.
The curse of the silos.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
honestly.
Adrian's got a question. What are your thoughts on the extent to which the divide between people that are for climate action and against it actually exists versus it being a tool, i.e., like the example Alisa shared of BP's carbon footprint framing to create conflict and prevent positive collective momentum for creating climate solutions? That's a
So
mouthful
there's
there, Adrian.
yeah. So there's something called the Yale Six Americas study that they run every year that shows how concerned people are in their poll about
That's
climate
right.
change.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it goes from like, really alarmed to yeah, screw this, And so, there's a continuum of like 6 categories in there, right? And the majority of people are concerned or on the more concerned end of the spectrum, but the ones on the less concerned, like they are loud, and that leads to this perception that there are more of them than there are of us. And so it becomes very interesting of when you're trying to talk about this, because everybody's sort of reluctant to kind of put that stake in the ground, with colleagues, with family, right? But there are more concerned people than you would think. It's just that you're more likely to get into a fight with the minority position.
Right,
Yeah, and
right.
I'd also say like that again brings up coming to something with curiosity,
Mhm.
because we dichotomous thinking is a very human thing, and then tribalism is a very human thing. And so if we abandon our tribe, that's scary. That means resources are
Yep.
lacking. We might be, I mean, that literally means we could die tonight, and from a evolutionary
Evolutionary, yeah.
standpoint. Yeah, and so tribalism is very much so built into the way we organize ourselves as a social primate. And so if we go against the tribe, we could be pushed out. And so
Right,
at times, you might not actually hear a person's true belief. You might just hear their lack of desire to go against the noise. And so
right,
that's, if you come with curiosity,
Right.
swap with pollution. No one likes pollution. So if you're having a conversation with someone that doesn't want to get into, you know, the warming of the atmosphere and get into the science behind it, no one likes a piece of trash in their street. And so, that's something that can really bring us back. And then, greenhouse gas emissions are just trash in our air, right?
Right,
So
right.
you're just
well,
really
and
bringing it back to simple terms.
even people who don't believe in it in the like, oh, this ideology stuff, like I have a family member who lived in a coastal home, let's say, and there's no such thing as climate change. There's no such thing as any of this. But, it's really weird that for the last 15 years, we've had all of these storms that have damaged that we've had flooding, we've had damaged bulkhead on the boat dock, we've had, all this problem, like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why have there been all these storms? And I'm like, but like it's not that they don't see the things that are happening. They see the things that are happening. They just don't attribute it to the same things that science does.
Yeah. I've also heard a lot of pushback about, climate change is occurring, but it's something that's, happened for billions of years, and it's just a natural process. And so removing the human cause
Right,
aspect
right.
of it, that can be one that you can encounter. For me, I don't see climate deniers that often. Sometimes I mean, every once in a while there might be, someone that I feel like is kind of just like saying something to be a part of the conversation, I guess. For me, it's more so those that are inactive in the climate space. Like they are concerned, they might check that box in that
Right.
survey, but they're, doing status quo, same old, and not really taking action.
Right.
and I do wholeheartedly believe that every job and every person is a climate job and a
Yes.
climate contributor.
Yes.
And it's really just deciding that today is the day that that job or that persona begins, because that's the only thing that needs to happen.
That is such a great segue into the last question I wanted to ask of you. And that's really just talking about climate as a driver of innovation and what can, organizations do and stuff. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on, what are the it's easy to fall into the trap of doom and gloom when it comes to climate change and the climate crisis, and it is absolutely an urgent issue and stuff. And also, there are opportunities within that to help you redefine what you do. I had the privilege last year of interviewing Paul Randall and Alexis Eyre, the authors of Sustainable Marketing: The Industry's Role in a Sustainable Future. Great book, amazing stuff. And they reframe marketing as an engine of thriving and an engine of well-being, as opposed to an engine of growth and exploitation. And so I'm just wondering if you have advice, similar advice, around like what can an organization do on the innovation front, knowing that many organizations not very good at innovation, but I'd love to hear if you have some suggestions there.
So I think one of the things to be aware of is that there's a lot of innovation out there, and there's a lot of technology that already exists that can go a long way to
Right.
solving the climate crisis. Both Jenny and I are going to be at Climate Week next week. Next week already, geez. Whoa, September's moving fast. But like, there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of tools. But what we're coming up against, I know this was a huge discussion surrounding the Biden climate plan, the investment.
I
Infrastructure Act.
Yes. Okay. So, you know, it wasn't so much that there wasn't the money there. Like, I mean, they'd allocated money, things had already been in place. They didn't have people who were trained to do the things that needed to be done. So, you know, before you can get to the point of actually fixing the problem, you have to train the people to
Right,
do the
right.
jobs that build the infrastructure to solve the problem, right? And that's, you know, that's a long time thing. But there's, you know, people here, you know, oh, well, there's money for this, but now it's not being solved. Oh, government's broken, right? Like there's no
Right, right.
understanding that there are multiple steps in this process, and that we're doing that it requires retraining, and that it requires resource development or new infrastructure, new industry to support this. And there's a lot of technology that's already there. We just need to get it going, right? Like we can do this. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't grasp at this point. Is
Right.
that there's a whole economic engine behind this, and there can be economic growth behind this kind of like dramatic life change.
Thank you for that. Jenny, do you have any follow-ups on that?
I mean, I think it's really just talking about how this is a journey. And so there's a lot of really positive business aspects that come out of this process with,
Right.
innovation, like you've mentioned, but also cost saving,
Mhm.
stakeholder loyalty, customer engagement. Like there's so many things that come with this type of initiative. And so if you are just continuing to learn, most of us here, I assume, are in love with the B Corp movement. And so it's very similar to the B impact assessment where, you know, sure, if you were just looking through a tunnel, it's to achieve the certification. But
Get a
then when
score.
you look at all of the questions and all of the initiatives that are built into the entire certification, which is just the basic end goal, you're going to increase your sales, you're going to increase
Right.
employee morale, less turnover of your customers and your employees. You're going to become more engaged in your community. And so there's a plethora of things to reap and risks to mitigate when you start to think of these things. And I push back on, I mean, if you want to start with plastic straws, you go for it. That's a doorway into the next thing. But I also think if you're loving data and you're hungry for innovation, if you're looking at the footprint of your digital assets, the world is your oyster after you start
That's
to
for sure.
understand, what that means and what things could be done. Now you're starting to understand, well, what's a better way I can engage with my customer that's more immediate and quick? And so now you're starting to actually see, your conversion rates lower. And, I mean, I love the journey because
Yep.
I know it's
Same.
not as sexy to talk about, but the journey is what it is. Like that's the meaning of life.
Right. Well, and if you're a lifelong
Tired.
learner, then it feeds you. You know what I mean? Like if you're constantly open to this idea of learning all the time, which is a great way to be, then it just feeds that need to, kind of constantly be learning things and understanding new things.
Yeah, I love that.
One quick follow-up, Leslie had the name of the study you mentioned, the Yale, is it the Yale Climate Connections Group?
If you Google Yale Six Americas, you should be able to find it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Jenny, Alisa, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and for engaging with us in this conversation. Really appreciate it. And thanks very much for everything and everything that you do and for writing these books. They're great. I did put links to them in the chat. So if you don't have copies of them, go get them now. It's great. They make great presents. And we recorded this, so we will be sharing out links and resources and stuff like that afterwards. You'll get that within a day. Any closing thoughts either of you have to share with the folks in the audience?
I
If
mean,
you're, if,
other than me just disclosing the meaning of life, I think that was like pretty, that's a
How can I
soundbite,
compete?
right?
How can I compete with the meaning of life? I mean,
right,
honestly.
I do and do for you.
I mean, I think it's really important to just remember you're in control. So resist the urge to feel as if you need to pick a side. Really be curious about yourself, and then that will help you be curious about others in the way that you're communicating as a brand or as an individual. And then just remember to keep coming back to the goal and coming back to the data. And that's what's really going to help drive what you're looking to get for this year and the following. So just stay true to what the path is that
Yeah.
you've adopted.
Stay on that journey.
And there's
Yeah.
no shortage of
Awesome.
things to learn in this whole process. Like this is probably what drew me to this in the first place, is that, it's a fire hose of information, and
Totally.
I do love a good research project, but it's amazing to me to see how everything is so interconnected, and where you
Yeah.
can where those points are that you can tip the scales in the favor of a world that you want to live in.
That's awesome. That's a great note to close on. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Take
Thanks,
care.
Tim.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jenny.